So I just want to say, first of all, good morning to everybody joining. I think we'll have a few more people jumping on. We've got quite a long list of registrants this morning. So just in the interest of time, we'll start moving ahead. But I hope you've all had a great week, and I hope you've all managed to celebrate International Women's Day on Monday. As you know, we've been celebrating this for 2 weeks. Well, we're into the first week now. We've got another week to go. We kicked off last Thursday, which was the 4th of March, by joining the Sydney Stock Exchange, and we joined 89 other exchanges around the world to ring in the bell and mark the opening of the Gender Equality and International Women's Day. And as you know, International Women's Day is celebrated all over the world. So we believe that international events call for international celebrations. So that's why our Reality Zone program is running in all different time zones to accommodate everybody. And I was just saying to Jan, last night's session, we had people from Sydney, London and Singapore, and it was just going off. So it's just been amazing. And I must just say a huge congratulations to you for signing up for this masterclass. You're going to be in for a real treat from Jan, I have to say. We've had several discussions about the research report together and how it actually shows up for women. So you're going to discover and learn a lot from this morning as Jan shares the results. Drop a Y in the chat box if you're excited about the masterclass, and I certainly am. And this masterclass is intended to share the results of the advisory board research, namely achieving scale, breaking through barriers for female founders, and form the foundation for open discussion, obviously. So I just want you to jot down any questions that you come up with as Jan goes through the presentation, because at the end we're going to facilitate a Q&A discussion. Jan's going to spend about 20 minutes covering the content, and then we'll have about 40 minutes for discussion. So we really do encourage you to jump in with the questions and open this up for a really deep and interesting discussion. As Jan says, the report is one thing. When we do the research and we produce a report, that's one thing. But to get the conversation going around the research is where we really make a difference. And that's why you're here today. If you haven't already seen the research report, I'm just going to drop a link now into the chat box, which will take you directly to that report. And we will make the content and the links available to you after this session. So don't worry if you haven't captured everything. We'll issue it all out to you straight away. Now, the theme for International Women's Day this year is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. And our hope is that we can make a difference to you and give you something memorable at this special time. We're now well and truly underway with the Reality Zone series of masterclasses, which, as I said, launched on the 4th of March live from the Sydney Stock Exchange. And these masterclasses normally carry a fee, but thanks to the Sydney Stock Exchange this year, we've been able to offer them free of charge. Yes, not just free of charge, but you can actually register for as many as you like. So I'd say fill your boots, go for it. They're all really, really interesting webinars and masterclasses. So make sure that you check out all the other masterclasses that are available and claim that seat as soon as you can. And don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues about this. We're just going to drop a note in the chat box with a link that you can go to, which will take you to a website. You can have a look at any of those classes that are coming up. And also you will have received an email from me, but again, I'm just going to pop my email out to you. So if you do see any of the masterclasses that you're interested in joining and they don't fit your time or your schedule, then just let me know and we'll see what we can work out for you. And we're curious to know where everybody joins from. So I'm just going to drop a chat box message and say, well, I'm coming in from Sydney, and Jan's the same. But if you do have a moment and you are pumping away on that chat box, then do drop a message in there as to which city you're coming in from today. And if you do have problems with the chat box at all, great. Joining from British Columbia, Canada. That's amazing. That's fantastic, Patrice. We love this. Sunshine Coast, Queensland. Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, Tara. This is what we want. We want a truly international platform. So that's really demonstrated there. Thank you so much. Well, for those who are overseas, currently it's Friday morning here in Sydney, and we're drawing towards the end of our week, which of course started on Monday with International Women's Day. And we certainly hope that you all had a wonderful day wherever you were. 2021 is a very special year. Whilst International Women's Day has been around since the early 1900s. This year marked 110 years since International Women's Day was honoured in Austria, Denmark, Germany and Switzerland, with more than 1 million men and women who attended rallies campaigning for women's right to work, to vote, be trained, to hold public office and to end discrimination. I, for one, didn't realise that it actually had been going on for that long. But of course, we've come a long way on that journey, and more awareness has emerged, which drives us to continue our work in this very special space. So this year we partnered with the Sydney Stock Exchange to bring a series of masterclasses to every man and woman that we could reach and focus on supporting women in their mission to make a difference in the world and to have equal opportunities. And in true tradition, the Sydney Stock Exchange, along with 89 other participating exchanges, rang the bell to raise awareness for women's empowerment principles. And we were privileged to ring the bell along with VFAM from United Nations Women's Organisation, of which Jan is speaking today as a member of, and also Michael Goh, the CEO of Sydney Stock Exchange. So we had so much energy in that room. It was just unbelievable. And we kicked off our Reality Zone program right there in the boardroom overlooking the beautiful Sydney Harbour. Now, we at Braintree are supportive of the work completed by Sydney Stock Exchange, including establishing the world's first known ESG board to recognise and promote listed companies and provide equal opportunities. These exchanges, by controlling admission to the market, have such a big opportunity to advance corporate gender equality. And of course, Braintree would like to thank Sydney Stock Exchange for hosting these masterclasses in celebration of these 2 inaugural days. And that was really around gender equality and International Women's Day. And these Reality Zone masterclasses are running morning, day and night over the 2 weeks, commencing 4th of March, and they're covering all time zones in the globe. And obviously we've got people from Canada today, so that's all working. And again, these masterclasses are gifted to you courtesy of the Sydney Stock Exchange. And the only way that we can keep momentum is if you gift them onto your friends, colleagues and families. So make sure you spread the word. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly share a little bit about the Reality Zone. The Reality Zone is all about your reality now and how you create your new reality using tips, skills, tools and insights from exceptional women. And the Reality Zone is delivering this series of masterclasses in celebration of gender equality and International Women's Day. And it's packed with tons of topics from amazing speakers from all over the world. And they bring decades of learnings to share with you in the comfort of your own home, your office or your home office. And these are all designed for women, by women, and it's all about you. Drop a Y in the chat box if that sounds exciting. Now, again, I'm just going to drop the link in the chat box so you can access the schedule of events. And thanks to Sydney Stock Exchange, these are all free of charge. We normally do charge for these, but they're all a gift from Sydney Stock Exchange for these couple of weeks. Now, I'll also just share with you in the link a few links to, in the chat box, sorry, there, a few links to social media. And I encourage you to jump online and comment on your experiences. This helps to spread the word to others in your community so we can bring value into every woman's life where possible. We mentioned earlier that we can talk about research, but unless we start to open up the dialogue and the conversation, then that's where the impact really starts to occur. So please, please, please drop a line in the chat box. We will make these recordings available for people so we can continue to spread the work and the great work that Jan's been doing. Now, since 1991, female founded businesses have increased by 80%. Women don't lack ability or ambition. However, the number of female founders that are significantly scaling their businesses remains really low. To capitalise on the investments made to encourage women in business and significantly advance economic participation and opportunity for women, we need to uncover and understand the barriers to scale for female founders. The Advisory Board Centre, with support from the Australian Government's landing pads, Austrade, and Advance Queensland, has released the research Achieving Scale, Breaking Through Barriers for Female Founders. This is a research report that has been made available to you through the link, and we will make it available to you again after this session, but it's what Jan's going to be talking about today. Report and co-author and Advisory Board Centre COO Jan Easton will share these learnings from the research and lead an open discussion to explore the barriers and ideate strategies to significantly change the trajectory for female-led businesses. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jan Easton. Jan is a founding member of the Advisory Board Centre and Certified Chair. She's COO of the Global Membership Network. Jan leads the Advancing Women on Boards and Female Founders Initiative supporting women in business. Jan is an experienced entrepreneur, having founded or co-founded businesses in the US and Australia with a specific focus on commercializing technology and intellectual property. Jan is co-author of the report Achieving Scale, Breaking Through Barriers for Female Founders, and is an active contributor to panels and discussions in the area of female entrepreneurship. And I can vouch for Jan, she's a very, very interesting presenter. She's very engaging, so I know you're going to really enjoy this session. She's also a member of United Nations Women Australia, an activator with SHEO, patron of Fire with Girls Shaped Flames, and mentor with UQ Ventures iLab, Young Change Agents and Mentoring for Growth in Queensland. So without further ado, please welcome Jan. Jan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate that welcome and the opportunity to be able to share this message and support the great work that you're doing as well. As Cindy mentioned, what I'll do is I'll share my screen so that we can provide some context to the discussion by sharing with you a little bit about the research. And then we'll be able to have a really open discussion. Hopefully there'll be some great questions coming through. We'll be able to have a discussion about, so what does that research mean? As Cindy mentioned, research in it of itself it's just another report, right? It's just another thing. What we really want to do is create the opportunity for conversations, and through those conversations, hopefully activate new learning, new networks, and new opportunities, not just for women in business, but for the wider support ecosystem of people that support women in business. So I'll share my screen if you'll bear with me one moment. Can everyone see that there? Yep, excellent. I'll just go back. As Cindy mentioned, the report, it's available in the link. It's a publicly available report, so please feel free to share this with your networks, with other women that you know in business, men that you know in business, and that wider sort of communities that you participate in. It's a little bit of information to be able to link in with me. I do strongly encourage you to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I think it can be a very powerful tool to create connections and opportunities if we use it in the right way. And I'll just share with you a little bit about how this particular session came about. Cindy actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, would you be interested in having a discussion? And I thought, absolutely, let's do that. If she wouldn't have taken that initiative to reach out on LinkedIn, we may not actually be here today in this way. So I really applaud you, Cindy, on just saying what might happen. The worst I could say was no, right? To be able to do it. So we need to take that initiative to make things happen for ourselves and for the businesses that we're involved in. So please feel free to connect in with me and reach out on LinkedIn. This research came to life both from the Advisory Board Center, but we were very fortunate to have some research partners that participated with us and funded the research. Queensland Government. Cindy mentioned before I was based in Sydney. I'm actually based in Brisbane at the moment, and we do quite a lot of work with the Queensland Government, specifically around supporting both small and scaling businesses through to women in business and women on boards. So Queensland Government and their innovation arm, Advanced Queensland, were supporters of this research. Mullins Law, which is a pretty progressive law firm here in Queensland as well, were supporters, and Australian Landing Pads through Austrade. And Australian Landing Pads is one of the key initiatives that the Australian government uses to help Australian businesses to go global. This report is here to be used, and it's going to be used by different people in different ways because the information here will speak to people at different times and in different, I guess, aspects of their working life. So we know that it's been very valuable throughout the wider ecosystem of everything from funders and investors, business groups and accelerators, professional service providers, people that are advisors and directors, government, as well as personal supporters of women in business. This particular piece of research focused on scale, and I think it's really important that we get a common understanding of what is scale and why does it actually matter. So scaling a business means that you want to grow or expand in a proportional and usually profitable way, right? That's always the key, is making sure it's a profitable way. But scale also means about reaching full potential. And I think it's really important to notice that not everybody is driven by financial measures. We've got a lot of businesses that are, their key metrics are around the impact that they have in their wider communities and in the people that they serve. Scale matters, though, because it's what drives employment growth and it's what drives sales and economic growth. But scale also matters because it's the recognition of that founder ambition. When we go into business and we have hopes and dreams and ambition to achieve things, I would like to see that more women that are starting their business are able to achieve those ambitions. I think it's also really important to note, though, that scale is a choice. It's not a judgment. Growth is not the objective of all businesses. And I think that it's really important that as women in business, we feel really comfortable and confident about the choices that we'll make. And we'll talk about that a little bit more throughout today's presentation, hopefully in the Q&A session afterwards, that growth should not be a blind objective for every business. It should be an intentional objective. What we did in this particular research, though, is we specifically looked at participants that indicated that they wanted to grow their business, right? So this isn't about people who start businesses to right-size them or to do flexibility or job replacement. Those are completely valid decisions to make about business, but this is specifically looking at female-led businesses that had growth ambitions. What started, or I guess was the catalyst for this research, is we were looking at a previous piece of research that we had done through the Advisory Board Center into the overall business sector or the overall business population, which include both male and female founded businesses as well as co-founded businesses. And what we found in that particular piece of research was around 17% of those businesses were sitting under the annual revenue mark of 1 million. 75% of them identified growth as an opportunity in the next 18 months. And 70% of them were seeking support from specialist advisors. Through the work that we do with Advanced Queensland, delivering a program specifically to support female founders, we started to gain this research base of women in business. And we started to notice that things were different. And we thought, let's be really curious about that. What's going on there? So we widened out that research base nationally to participants from all across Australia, women in business. And when we started to look at that research data and compare it to the overall business population, we noticed what we call the Great Divide. 65% of those female-led businesses had annual revenues under 1 million. 91% identified growth as an opportunity. And only 57% of them were indicating, or the majority of them were indicating, that they sought support from generalist coaches and consultants. And we'll dig into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. But we saw this great divide and we thought, what's going on there? We often talk about the challenges for women in business, but we wanted to have a more nuanced conversation to separate out what's just hard about being in business, what's difficult for everyone in business, as opposed to some of the specific challenges or barriers, whether they're real or perceived, for women in business. And then that way, when we really focus in on that nuanced conversation, hopefully we can start to create some strategies to get some different traction and some different results for women in business. So to give you an idea, the three key areas that we looked at in the research were around personal choices made by the founder, supportive networks, and funding. Cindy mentioned this before about the rise of the female entrepreneur. And I was actually really surprised at these particular statistics looking back at the ABS data. But since 1991, female founded businesses have increased by 80%. That's phenomenal. And in the decade to 2019, 2/3 of new business entrants were female owned, right? I had no idea about the scale and the speed at which the tide is really turning to support female entrepreneurship. And I think what is wonderful is the support that has been provided all the way from federal government down to even just personal relationships to encourage more women to go into business. But as Cindy mentioned, what we really want to do is not just see more women starting businesses, we want to see them achieving their growth ambitions and their scale ambitions as well. Supporting female founded businesses, it's not a women's issue. And we don't look at this through a gender lens. And I personally don't like to have polarized conversations where it's women owned businesses good, men owned businesses or bad or different. We need to really look at this through the lens of it being an economic imperative. It's no longer just a women's issue. It's a business issue. And it's actually the future health and security of the Australian economy is going to be dependent on the support and the growth that we're able to achieve across all business entrepreneurship, but also specifically female-led businesses. I want to give you a bit of an idea about the demographics. There's no typical female founder, and I like to say, nor should there be. There is no profile of what makes a successful woman in business or a successful female business entrepreneur. And just to give you a little bit of an idea from the survey participants, we actually had a wide range of founder age represented. And many people, and ourselves included, were quite surprised at the age demographic. I actually had a presentation earlier this week, and one woman said, well, I'm over 50 and I feel a little bit alone, like I'm the only one starting a business. It's actually saying, well, you know what, you're not alone. There's actually a massive growth of women over 50 starting business. So in our research, we saw that 27% of the participants were over 50. We can draw some assumptions from this. Often it is in that sort of 21 to 29 range. That's where we're often gaining our real world business experience. We're out there, we're having our jobs, we're learning in business, we're developing that really hopefully wide and deep, rich knowledge base. 30 to 39, a lot of women are often looking after kids and primary caregivers, or they're still continuing on their professional journey. And then over that age, we're starting to see a shift really towards female entrepreneurship. And I think that that's incredibly exciting for that. So take comfort in knowing wherever you are on that sort of age demographic, you're absolutely welcome in this female founder space. The business age as well, we had a representation. We weren't just looking at businesses that were hoping to scale or that were on that emerging side of their business journey. We had input and insight from businesses that were further along on their growth journey and had already achieved scale. So both in terms of business age, from being the emerging or startup businesses all the way through to those businesses that were celebrating over 10 years in business. And from a revenue perspective, we had participants all the way from pre-revenue through to hundreds of millions sort of corporatized businesses that were female-led. The scale journey is messy. When we do our financial forecasts, and often when we're looking at what we think growth is going to look like, we like to imagine this beautiful, smooth hockey stick growth, right? We'll start off, we've got a little bit, then suddenly we're going to gain some traction, and then we've got, we'll just rocket up into the stratosphere of growth. What we know, though, is this scale journey, as I said, is messy, and it's a little bit bumpy. That's there. When we look at the female founder cohort, we found that 65% of those female-led businesses were generating annual revenues under $500,000. But there was a lot of growth ambition there. 91% indicated that they had growth ambitions. And so what we were seeing in the research is that there's almost a new threshold or glass ceiling, if you will, for female-led businesses. And $500,000 is a real turning point or make or break point where female founders need to think about their businesses very differently. And we'll explore that in a little bit more detail. Coming out of the research, and what I'd like to really talk about today as we open this up into the wider Q&A, is we found that there were 4 key themes around potential barriers to scale. These included the delegation threshold. So when and how a founder begins to leverage other people's time and expertise to be able to grow their business and significantly grow their business. Business investment literacy is another key theme. This is the knowledge to navigate funders and different financial arrangements to improve the overall financial position of the business. And it's actually from a founder's perspective, having that knowledge to be able to achieve that. Who's got your back, right? Being networked and being able to actively access support networks of people that you can have as trusted advocates and advisors for yourself and your business. And then ultimately it comes down to the execution gap. So how do we close the gap between knowing and doing to make sure that our intent or our ambition to grow the business actually meets purposeful action? So we'll just explore those for a moment. And as we go along, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. And then we'll be able to go back and make sure we cover those off and have a really good discussion about those. Now, there's a lot of information on this particular slide, and I don't really expect you to read all of this. I want you to know that this is the kind of content that's available in the report, but I want to hone in on a couple of key items around the delegation threshold just to help inform our future discussion. And hopefully if something resonates with you in this particular topic, you grab the report and dig into a little bit more detail. So the delegation threshold really is an understanding of that point where you have to, as a founder, entrust other people to deliver on your business proposition, right? And to grow and scale your business. There's a couple of things that we know from the research, and one of those is that knowledge-based businesses or professional service style businesses are difficult to scale. We saw once we went past the $500,000 threshold, the number of professional services businesses that were female-led reduced by about 1/3. And what that shows is that there's a real tipping point from a scale perspective when you need to leverage other people. And for those of you that might be familiar with this particular style journey, it becomes a real shift about when you're bringing in other people to then deliver on a service. You have to get your margins and metrics right because you're essentially feeding the machine. And one of the quotes that we pulled out was, well, I was outsourcing work to be able to grow the business, but then it was hard to get enough work to keep those contractors happy, right? So how do I actually get that volume coming through when I'm trying to scale knowledge or scale people? And that's a particular challenge. And it's often one that requires a different way of thinking about it. When we looked at how female-led businesses that had achieved beyond that $500,000 threshold versus those that were underneath it, access to external support and advice to help them with that delegation threshold was incredibly important. So the women-led businesses that were over that $500,000 threshold were more likely to access external help and support. They're more likely to have a governance board or an advisory board. And what's actually quite interesting is how and where they spend their time, and we'll touch on this again in a moment, is they were less likely to be accessing business groups or networking. So they were less likely to be spending their time in network style environments and more likely to be spending their time actually growing their business or with customers or developing their staff. I think the other thing to recognize here is that the larger the businesses, we actually found that the female founders were less likely to indicate that they had concerns about managing their personal time. And so we know whenever they're achieving that scale threshold and delegating work out to other people, whether that's from a service capacity or an employee capacity, it means that they have less of those pressures on managing their personal time, less of it's falling on their own shoulders. Business investment literacy, and again, we'll dig into this a little bit more, I think is a very important conversation that we need to have. There is regular media reports about the reduced level of funding that goes to female founders when we look at things like venture capital and equity funding. But there's actually a slightly more nuanced conversation that sits behind this. The majority of the participants in the report indicated that they had intention to achieve external funding for their business, but less than 9% had actually achieved that or acted on that when they looked at where they were in their growth trajectory. And there's a couple of different factors that come into play, but one of the key themes that stood out was the concept around business investment literacy. We know that both anecdotally and through the research, many of the women we talked about, they know their numbers, they know where the dollars are in the business, they understand their business budget. They've got a relatively strong financial literacy in terms of things like budget and cash flow, and even their margins. When am I making money? Where the real shift is, or potential knowledge gap that's starting to be seen, is around business investment literacy. So that shift of how do I use other people's money to significantly grow my business, and what are the factors that make that attractive for someone to want to give me that money, whatever funding source that comes from. So being able to really understand that will significantly change the trajectory, I believe, for female founders. Who's got your back? And this is a really interesting, I think, concept to explore, because one of the things that we found is that female founders, compared to the overall business population, were more likely to socialize their support. And that comes from both, they were more likely to reach out to things like social networks and social networking groups for their support. But they also tended to potentially blur the lines between people that supported them as an individual or as a woman, and those that specifically supported them as a founder in business and as a business person. And I'll just share with you a little bit about what this sounds like. So it's people that say, you are wonderful, you have a great idea, I love you and the business that you're doing, as opposed to those that will then, and how can I help you as an individual, as a person? Can I look after the kids? Can I help you do this? Versus those kind of supporters that say, how are you stepping up as a founder? What are you doing to grow this business? How can I help you grow your business? How can I help you be a better leader, a better founder? And they're often quite different support networks, both very valuable, but there's a very distinct shift of the female-led businesses that go over that $500,000 threshold and really start to achieve scale, and those that don't. And it's the difference between networking versus being networked. Who are those people and those networks that you have in business that you can call on, that can give you the advice, that can create the introductions, that can help you navigate the very tricky and treacherous road of scaling a business? And finally, it's around the execution gap, right? And so this is where we talked about closing that gap between knowing and doing. And one of the ways that we looked at this from the research is we asked female founders, what have you done and what are you intending to do in your business? And what we found in this execution gap is often there's a bit of a narrative around supporting women in business where we talk about the concept of self-confidence. So confidence of the individual. And what we found is that the participants were incredibly confident in their ability, and they were incredibly confident in their business. And that really shows in that high level of growth ambition that they have, 91% wanting to grow. And so what we found, again, when we looked at the nuanced conversation, is it's not a question of self-confidence, but a question around confidence in the ability to make decisions. And am I making the right decision? Am I prioritizing decisions in the right way? Am I prioritizing time and investment in the right way? And we found that that's really where this potential execution gap is. So it's that gap between the knowing and am I doing the right things? Am I deciding on the right things? And I think this is really important for us if we want to really support female founders to look at ways that we can separate this out. What is the difference between self-confidence and confidence in decision-making in business? And I think what's also really important to note is that that highlights that money doesn't fix everything. Although we know that money and access to funding is one of the key drivers or key perceived barriers for women in business, that also comes through in the anecdotal conversations when you said, if I was to give you $100,000, what would you do with it? How would you use that to significantly grow your business? What would you spend that money on first? That's a more difficult question to answer, right? And that's part of both the business investment literacy, as well as that potential execution gap, knowing how I'm actually going to make those decisions that are going to change the trajectory of my business. So scale is not a guarantee, and I think this is really important to note. My experience with the female-founded business community is we're not necessarily looking for anyone to make business easy for us. We want things to feel fair, right? We want to know that we have that same opportunity to be heard and seen for our contribution. We also want to know that if we fail, that is okay as well, right? That it isn't about propping up female-led businesses. We want to be able to have that same business experience just like our male counterparts. And what we know for scale is that it does require different aspects to come together, different pieces of the puzzle. You need to have a solid resourcing and funding base. You need founder ambition and capability. We need personal support networks that allow us to be present and lean into our business opportunities. You need a really robust and agile business model, and you need the right professional insight and advice at the right times. So I'd encourage each of you in business to really consider, do I have these different pieces of the puzzle in place at the right time to prepare me and support me in my business in our scale journey? It also requires active participation of the supporter ecosystem. So really significantly closing this gap of females that are starting businesses as opposed to those that are significantly growing it is a job that belongs to all of us in the ecosystem. Funders and investors have a role to play. Our business groups and accelerators absolutely have a role to play. Professional service providers and those that we go to for trusted advice. Our personal supporters and support networks within the advisors and director community need to understand the support as well as the potential challenges faced by women in business, and government absolutely has a role to play as well. What I love to do, though, is actually focus on this incredible positivity that exists in the business community. We certainly see it within the Australian context, but I've got viewpoints into the global community. And Patrice, I'd love for you to share your insights from Canada. We are on the cusp of a fantastic trajectory. When you look at the momentum that's being created for women in business, and this particular quote actually came from one of the survey participants, there's never been a better time, I think, to be a woman in business. And there's never been a greater opportunity for us to achieve what we want to achieve for our businesses and for ourselves within the professional environment. So what I'd like to talk about in this open discussion is how can we significantly improve the trajectory of women in business? You may have potential challenges that you faced yourself in business. Or you might have strategies that you've seen have worked really well for yourself or in the operating environments that you've been in. But I'd like for us to really have an open conversation about that. And I just wanted to end on this quote that Cindy shared through the Reality Zone project. And it's about women have always been at the forefront of progressive movements. And I absolutely agree with that. We have everything we need right now to be able to make this a reality, and we can take very much a leadership role in this. So Cindy, I'd like to go ahead and I'll stop sharing my screen so we can have a little bit more of a discussion. And I'd like to just open the discussion up.
Jan, that's been amazing, and congratulations on such an amazing piece of work. Every bit of that I could connect to, and it warms my heart to know that there's others out there who have gone on the same journey or are going on the same journey, and so much of that I can relate to. It really does actually touch me quite deeply. I am going to open up the floor, and I'd love to have a few questions with you as well. But I can see that Tara has asked a question. Jan, where can we access funding and resourcing? Where do we start, and when do we ask for it? It's hard to know at what point you chase it. She says, I think the challenge is that there is a lot of people talking about helping female business owners, but there's so many options, it's hard to find the actual runway we need to pick and where to start in terms of seeking support. That's such an excellent question, because it's something that every female founder I know struggles with, and including myself. There's always a number of different avenues you can go, and you talked about that ecosystem, Jan, but we're also starting businesses which take a huge amount of our time and energy. So how much time do we spend in our business, how much time do we spend on our business, and where do we invest the best time in those ecosystems to get the results that we need? So if you don't mind, I think that Tara, feel free to come off mute if I haven't represented your question accurately, but and let's open up the discussion.
Sorry. I was just looking at I haven't even got myself dressed today. There you go. That's what happens when I've been at the desk since 5 o'clock this morning, It's just like, oh, shit, I'm never going to take my camera off. But anyway, I guess my question really, Jan, and thank you, Cindy, for reading that, I think this is an issue. Like we work with a lot of women, but we're finding this ourselves as female founders. My co-founder is a female as well. And one of the biggest challenges is, and we hear this from women all the time, and it's happening for us as well, is we have to get revenue. We have to prove the model. We have to prove the strategy before we can even seek funding. But actually, we're both also trying to generate our income for our households when our business is only early revenue. So it's that, and I hear this for women all the time, is that they're trying to generate enough income in terms of their own profession and their households, but they can't put that time and energy into the business 100%. So then do they get investment to pay them a salary to do that? Do they outsource? It's just like, this is where we're seeing as a huge issue in terms of, and we're feeling it in terms of getting past that $500,000 mark, because you can't pay two founders an income on $500,000. So, that's the challenge, I think.
It is. And congratulations on the juggle that you're doing, and the support that you're also then providing for other women in business. And I guess what I'll say to that is, it is hard. It is absolutely hard. And that particular revenue, when do I pay myself? How do I generate income? Where do I go to get support? What does this look like? That is a challenge that's shared across the board in businesses and by all businesses, to be able to look at that. There are different aspects, though, that we know rise to the top a little bit for women in business around that. So revenue is always going to be your greatest source of investment, because you own it and it's yours and you're not giving up control, right? And in a lot of ways, we are in control of our revenue, although that may be hard to get to. It can be hard to get to that first customer. It can be hard to get to that first feeling of profit that's there. I'll touch on a couple of things that you shared. One is around that paying yourself. And I've got two viewpoints on this. I think the first is, it's not particularly attractive to external investors to pay you a salary. And that's a hard thing to hear, right? It's a hard thing, because to them, it's not necessarily productive use of capital. And that is certainly anecdotally, when we talk to women, that's the first challenge of, but how am I going to be able to pay myself to keep this thing going? And so when they're looking for external investment, and whether that is traditional investment through a bank loan, or loans from friends and family, even through to the more structured investment, like equity investment, that's kind of hard to get our head around, to be able to say, if I can get that money, then I can finally start paying myself a salary. And when people go, no, you need to use that money for other things, we go, but how do we make that work? And the reality is there's no real clear, simple answer to that. That runway and finding that runway to achieve growth, I think this is part of the investment question where often we look at external investment, and there's a perception from a lot of female founders as well as male founders in the early stage is that I should be able to access other people's money. Who you access that other people's money from we have to widen our viewpoint. It may not actually be venture capital or equity investment at that stage. And I want to carefully encourage people to not go down too far from a time investment standpoint, that investment path too early, because it may change their future trajectory and their future decision making. If you give up a particular piece of your company early on, you may not grow the company that you want, or you may not be able to grow in the way you want. And that's not just a matter of somebody saying, I'm taking control of the decisions. It's that you're going to have very different drivers and a very different master to answer to. We know that a lot of people, both men and women, go into business because they want to be in control. They want to be autonomous and they want to have their own choices. As soon as you start bringing on external investors from an equity standpoint, you've got to consider the impact of that. You have other people that you're answerable to. So the second part of that then becomes around, how do I access potentially government support or other support networks that might have a revenue threshold to them? And that can be quite challenging. What I normally suggest to people first is, even if something has an eligibility criteria, build a business case. Build a business case about why you should be there, right? You may not have that $100,000 in revenue yet, but you may have had $100,000 or $50,000 or $25,000 in sweat equity, in investment, in initial customer revenues that are there. Build your case, argue it. Don't take no for an answer yet, right? It's no, I think, is a not yet, but nothing will ever change the value. And the best thing about investment is your own revenue. So how do you mobilize your support base if everyone telling you, I love what you do, you've got a great business, this is a wonderful idea? How do you flip that into, how can you help me get my first customer? How can you help me get another customer? How can you help me get revenue in the business to be able to do that? Because then it's going to open up more decisions, and it's going to change the way you look at your business and the decisions you make around your business. I wish I had an easier answer for that. I really do, because it is the common entrepreneurial struggle that's there. We do know women are less likely, though. Their risk appetite is different, is what we see in those early stages. Women are less likely to go to friends and family for funding.
Yeah.
Women are less likely to access their own equity within their house or to put their personal assets and resources on the line in those earlier stages when we compare that to the overall business population, right?
Yeah.
And some of that can be because we feel like we have to be the ones to hold down the home, or maybe we have a partner that's in business, and so we have to spread the risk across business. There's different choices that are there. But I would encourage looking at those avenues of, can I max out my credit card? Can I get a personal loan? Can I get a business loan? What are those other pathways that are going to help me increase the runway to be able to get to revenue or get to increased revenue?
So would you have any advice for women as to where to start on that runway? Where do they actually line the plane up on the the white line? Because I think we talk about this ecosystem, it's there is so much options. It's really difficult for them to know, who do I call first? Is it a friend or family? Is it a coach? Is it a, I think, did you find in your research where there was one or two or three or four places that were better in terms of giving them a faster trajectory in terms of momentum?
We did find that the larger the business, the less likely they were to look to government to support them, right? And so I think that if I was to look for some inference from the research and from the conversations that I have, the smaller the business, sometimes the greater perception that other people should help us, right? I'm in it, it's hard, I need other people to help me. As we start to gain momentum in the business, we then look a little bit more to ourselves to say, I'm going to make this happen. And you hear this from people saying, I'm not going to bother applying for that $10,000 grant. It's easier for me to go and get another customer. I'll spend that time getting another customer. The absolute number one place to start has to be with revenue. How are you going to get that first fee paying aspect? For people that are building out a product or have a longer development cycle, that first revenue that you get may not be your ultimate business model or your ultimate revenue. You might have to sell some of your time, right, while you're building out the product. You might have to work part-time in someone else's business to be able to then fund the business. You might sell alternate products or services in the business that are going to be complementary to what you actually want to achieve. But I would say the number one thing to do for any business and women in business is be very, very realistic with yourself and with your time of how am I going to get to first revenue of people being able to pay that? And how am I going to absolutely strip out any extraneous expenses from my business? We tend to see a lot of people, and not just women, but also men, they might spend an incredible amount of money in the beginning setting up their brand, right? And setting up their business infrastructure that may not actually add value to them yet, right? And so they've already started with this incredible investment around things that actually don't generate revenue. So that would be the very first port of call. Absolutely look to all aspects of the support that government does. Certainly within Queensland, there's a variety of support, not just for women in business, but for business in general. And the different states across Australia and even internationally, government will often have those mechanisms to be able to support. But focus your time. Know what you want to get out of it. Grab it with both hands and then get on with business.
Thank you. I'll leave some questions and airspace for somebody else.
Thanks, Charlie.
Jan, thank you for answering that. That's really, there's heaps of things I just took away from that, which is just so logical as well. And I think they play into the hands of the way that women operate in our businesses too, because we do tend to be that little bit more risk averse. We do want to sort of have everything ducks lined up before we sort of make the next big step. So, focusing on driving revenue to start with is actually a really good piece of advice, because you can spend a lot of time chasing other people's money and investment, and then you can lose sight on what you're actually really trying to achieve. But to Tara's point, I mean, is there a place where we could look at? Is there a central sort of place that we could go to say, hey, this is where all the government grants are, particularly for women? I know in some of our preliminary conversations we talked about the fact that government are releasing some new funding at the moment, particularly for women. So, of course, for this conversation, that's highly relevant. So is there any pointers you can give to us as to where we can go to look for that information?
So within Australia, the federal government on International Women's Day, they just released round 2 of the Boosting Female Founders funding initiative. And it's not without its criticism, as most government initiatives are, but there's a lot of really good things to be able to look at what they're trying to do. So there is on business.gov.au, there is a grant finder service that's there to be able to look at those different support options. Each state-based government also has a resource that's there. Okay. With so much activity in this space, it is shifting and it's moving, and you are absolutely right. It's hard to stay on top of it, and it's really hard to open up the bandwidth that's necessary for ourselves as business owners and as parents and as friends and as wives and daughters to say, how do I investigate those options?
Yeah.
This is where having our support networks and who we tap into and the kind of resources that we look to put around us are so important, because it can often be those people saying, have you seen, do you know about, maybe you should tap into this.
Yeah.
So I would encourage setting aside a small piece of time, but a finite piece of time, either on a weekly or fortnightly or monthly basis, and you make that your hunting time to look at what are those resources available, what avenues do I have, what's going on out there in the market. That might be an hour, that might be 2 hours, and you put a beginning and end to it, but you do it with discipline to be able to see what's out there, because there is no one source of that information, because it's always shifting and changing, especially with government programs. They're opening and closing and moving around. You're in the early stage, in the startup sort of space. I think look also to your university ecosystems and your incubator and accelerator ecosystems and your networks.
Yeah.
Now, those networks can be quite different. Some of those networks are social networks for women in business, and some of those are business networks for women in business. And I think it's important to understand the difference between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, just speaking about that, Jan, it brought to mind, you know, we're talking about that ecosystem. There's a person that I was introduced to, and he's actually an accountant, but he specializes in these types of grants for startup companies. And he is completely across them in terms of what's coming up and what's available. And you can go to him and you can say, here's my business, this is what I'm doing. And he can say, well, you would be eligible for this, you wouldn't be eligible for that. So it kind of takes all the weeding out of it. And someone once gave me an analogy. If you think about a whole wall full of post office boxes, and what you want to do is pick the appropriate post office box for you that's relevant to your business right now at this point in time. But what happens is you pull out every single post office box, and then you empty the contents of that all over the floor, and then you've got to try and rummage through it and decide which is the right thing for me. So this particular chap, he was able to say to me, these are the areas that you can focus in. And that was really quite helpful, because it kind of weeded out the things that I would have wasted time looking for otherwise. And I'm actually just jumping onto my LinkedIn page at the moment. I'm going to drop a connection in the chat box, because this is for digital. This is for women in digital. And the reason I'm just sharing it now is it's an exclusive group that women in business can jump onto, and we can share these types of things together. So if somebody can ask a question, I have this motto this year, and it's called Just Ask. So I found that a lot of people were coming to me last year asking, hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And I always love to help. It's one of the passions I have, because I know what it feels like to be in that startup mode. But I found that I wasn't asking other people. So I decided that 2021 was going to be my year of Just Ask. So part of the Women in Digital group is that sort of forum for Just Ask. Like, this is a network of women that can help each other. And even on this discussion now, if anybody has a question that they wanted to actually ask of the group, like some people might say, hey, I really need a bit of help in my social media and I'm absolutely useless at it. Is there anyone can point me in the right direction of social media or marketing? I've asked the question, and people have come back to me and said, actually, there are some programs for, university students that you can, so I think it's called PGP. So you can tap into them. They're free. They don't cost you anything, and you've got some hands on deck to help you grow your business, but without having to sort of invest the time. So when you talk about that ecosystem, there's lots of different ways you can do things just to really give you that little bit of extra time to focus on what you need to do in your core business, rather than sort of being distracted. And, I think, like you said, it's not always about money that matters all the time. One of the things that I'm involved in is with the Enterprise Ireland group there, and that's all about promoting Irish companies, startup companies overseas. So we have an advisory board, and there's a group of really exceptional people, highly talented, highly experienced people. And every month we get together, and they have 3 or 4 companies come and present to us. It's a bit like, what's that show with all the entrepreneurs? Anyway, you know what I mean. And the English people are there, sort of deciding which ones they're going to go for or not. They ask those really hard questions. They challenge people on what they're presenting. So these forums are there to sort of say, actually, what is your value proposition? Why would I buy from you versus somebody else? What is your financial model? And when we're working on our own, we don't always really think about these things. Like you said, put a good business case together. So how can we utilize those sorts of networks that can really ask those hard questions and not make you feel uncomfortable, but challenge you to really be aware of what it is that people would be looking for if they're going to be part of your business. So in that case, people aren't coming and asking us for money. What they're asking for is our wealth of experience and knowledge to challenge them in how they can actually grow their businesses, particularly in a market that they're not familiar with. Look, I'm not sure if anybody else on the call has got any comments around that or questions around that they want to ask, but of course I encourage everybody to chat. Kelly, I think you've just come off mute.
Oh, sorry. No, I didn't have anything to ask. Sorry, I was just trying to get my...
Right. Welcome. I noticed that you joined just now, so there's probably to catch up on. And
I'll
we'll
just quietly.
Yeah, no, that's all right. We'll send you some information. What are you in business yourself at the moment, Kelly?
No, look, I am actually the program manager for the Female Founders Impact Program on behalf of Advanced Queensland. So I have a huge passion around female founders, innovation, startup, entrepreneurship, work closely with Jan, hopefully a little bit more closely in the future. We've got to set that up, trying to support and encourage and help female founders and, addressing some of the barriers that might be put in front of them. So I'm really curious and interested and looking forward to hearing, more of that discussion around those barriers and, what are the really practical things that we can do to help those female founders get past them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for joining us. And I'd love to catch up with you as well, because we talk about a lot of the fact that female entrepreneurs, female founders, it's not necessarily, we talked about the research and where they start to come in, but how are we even getting into the mindsets of year 11, year 12 girls, for example, because the world is a very different place now. We don't go off and necessarily take a job in a corporate that sees us through to retirement. And most of the children that are coming through as the next generation will have multiple jobs and even multiple businesses. So how do we start to create the right mindset for them? And we've got some programs that we do to really help that through. But look, I'm just going to share, Patrice has a question. I'm not a business owner or entrepreneur. I work in the post-secondary education space in curriculum development and intellectual property. The work being done in Queensland and more generally in Australia to understand the issues and support women in business is encouraging. As the university I work for here in Canada is careful to keep instructional language as inclusive as possible, we don't often talk about gender-based issues for women entrepreneurs in business courses. Some of the topics and issues you covered from the research today shows that there are very specific challenges for women in seeking financial support, decision making, being comfortable with risk and other aspects of being a female founder. I'll suggest our library add the research report, Achieving Scale, to our e-collections. It looks like very useful resource for our students. That's great, Patrice. What particular things would you suggest Jan has shared from that resource that might stand out particularly for you in Canada? We're really keen to hear. If you're happy to jump off mute, Patrice, and share any of those thoughts with you.
As we're just maybe waiting for Patrice to come off mute, I want to thank you for that feedback and the recognition from Cindy was alluding to of we need to start from an education base first and make sure that the way that we're educating entrepreneurs, not just female entrepreneurs, but also male entrepreneurs, people in business and those that support them, that they actually recognize that we can have nuances. I think there's an interesting dynamic which sometimes feels like a little bit of a pushback of the female founder title. And I see this pop up every once in a while on things like LinkedIn, where people say, I don't want to be known as a female founder. I want to be known as a founder. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And one of the things that we wanted to begin to tease out of this conversation is, again, that it's not a polarized conversation. of male-led businesses versus female-led businesses. And we see this debate go everywhere from business ownership through to even female representation on boards. And I think it's when we can start to have a slightly more nuanced conversation to be able to say, it's not a better than, it's a different. And the experience of women in business can be different to those of men in business. And we need to recognize what those differences are and not necessarily remove them, but seek to understand them and say, how can we create, again, more inclusive environments that appreciate that and recognize that. In a lot of ways, I think that COVID has actually been a fantastic thing for women in business, whether you're within an employee relationship or you're in a business ownership relationship, even though we know that women have been disproportionately affected by COVID from job loss, there's this really interesting thing, I believe, that's come out of it. COVID has equalized and normalized the working from home and the challenges that we all face. Whether you're the male CEO or you're the female CEO, when you're on a Zoom call, your neighbor is going to start their lawnmower. Your dog is going to start barking. Your child is going to run into the room. The mailman's going to show up. And so what I hope that it's done is it's made us a little bit more understanding of the human experience of being in business, and that we don't actually have to apologize anymore for being humans. And that's been a burden that mostly women have had to bear in business, because we do have a stronger proportion of women that work from home or have home-based businesses, that have care roles, and whether that's caring for children or that may be caring for parents, or even just caring for themselves in that environment. So if we look at this and say, well, how can we humanize the business experience in the first instance for both men and women? How can we create structures that are inclusive? How can we involve men in this solutions of supporting women in business? And then how can we also recognize that, as I said before, there are some things that are just difficult about being in business, and there are some things that are tricky about being in business that is a shared experience. And then there are some things that are more unique to the experience of women in business. And then how might we be able to put some strategies into place for those? And that can be everything from as simple as, with Australian landing pads, they recognized on their overseas missions that even in a situation where there was maybe a male and female co-founder, when those businesses had the opportunities to go for 3 months in country to one of the landing pads to start to make inroads, it was generally the man that went rather than the woman. And so they started to look at the structure of their programs to be able to say, how might we make that more inclusive? How might we be able to make that more attractive to women to be able to participate in that? And whether that's because they needed to have different family commitments, whether it's because women may not have felt as comfortable going to another country on their own for 3 months, all of those different factors, but they were curious enough to ask the question and to then start to look at ways that they might be able to put some strategies into place to improve that. Kelly mentioned this before in a program that I saw earlier this year. We need progress to happen faster. So I think we all need to continue to agitate for things to happen quicker, but we also need to recognize progress that is being made and say, how can we build on that, right? How can we continue to build on that?
Thanks, Jan. There's a few other questions that have popped up as well. I think Patrice has made a comment, which I think is really really good to observe, and then we can answer some of the other questions. Patrice said, "I don't think we have many resources for our female business students to consider, and they probably wouldn't hesitate. They probably would hesitate to ask." So, you know, I guess thanks, Jan, for the work that you've done in creating this research, because the wider we can spread this, the better. And certainly through these channels and through the people on this call, we can start to extend that. And I think Patrice will hopefully have that in his e-learning library over there in Canada. And again, Patrice, just contact Jan or myself if there's anything else that we can do to help to support that. Tara also mentioned, I think language is an important thing in discussion as well. Often women, particularly regional women, don't even consider themselves as entrepreneurs. I think that's a really interesting point, because it comes back to confidence and how we perceive ourselves as well. And with that, how assertive are we with our businesses? So if that's something that you want to explore a little bit more, Jan, that would be great.
I absolutely love that you've raised this point, Tara, because I do think language is important. And this concept of what an entrepreneur is, we see this, yes, both with regional businesses, men and women, where often they'll say, I'm just a business owner, right? Or I'm just the owner. I'm not an entrepreneur, because I think that that is something else, right? Or identify that with a different way of sort of being. And so I think that this is where this perception of judgment that tends to come into the conversation. And it was something that we were very confident or conscious of, I should say, when we talk about the scale journey, particularly for female founders. We hear often a lot of what you should be doing. You should do this, you should do that in your business. And it's very, very limiting, because we think if I don't want to do that, it then therefore means something that I'm doing is wrong, right? The choices that I'm making are wrong. We need to really crack open this language and start talking about could. What could you be doing? What are your options? Consider your different options and then make the right choice for yourself. So one of the other particular challenges for regional-based businesses that came through both anecdotally and the research is, how do I identify people like me? So in a regional-based environment, I may be the only female entrepreneur that has a business over $1 million, and I can't see anybody else like me. So I don't know where to go to have the conversations with other business owners that are facing similar challenges or on a similar stage of their business journey, or that are at that next stage, so they can help elevate me and lift me up to that next stage. So I think it's really important when we think of our networks, that we have maybe our close networks, our physically close networks, and that we open ourselves up to those wider networks so that we can identify with people that are at the same stage of the journey as us.
Jan, that's such an important point, just talking about those networks and building that self-confidence and assertiveness. They're often these sort of soft skills that are necessary to be successful. And, I work with a lot of companies, a lot of people who are setting up their own companies. I've had a lot of experience across building companies in Silicon Valley, being part of IPO processes, seeing the differences in how those companies are run and the confidence that is required around that. And then also working with smaller startup companies that, the characteristics of those, you'd think that they would fail miserably, but they still manage to get through and actually sell those companies. So the experience ranges right across the spectrum, but always starts at that point of, what do I believe in myself? What do I believe in my company and my product and my service, whatever it is that I'm selling? How do I determine that? And how do I go to market with a very, very clear focus on what I'm going to achieve? Because we talked about the networks, and you and I have spoken about this a little bit before, is that, there's a lot of people providing input. Somebody asked, would a role model be considered to be one of those resources? And often we can get a lot of information which can lead us up a different garden path. And whilst that access is hugely valuable and very much welcome, sometimes it might distract us from what we're really trying to do. So a lot of the work that I do, excuse me, with my clients is around keeping them focused, determine what is it that goal is that you need to achieve. What do you need to do to stay on focus? What do you need to do to be successful? And then how can you take on board the information that's coming at you, but make sure that you stay on track with what is true to your own self and true to your own heart, because that's where a lot of people sort of get off track, is when they start to get a few new different shiny objects, or they're going in different paths based on what people have said. So keeping that focus is really, really important.
Absolutely. Janelle, I think you had a question.
Yes. Look, I'm fascinated by what you're talking about. My background is in change leadership, and I've also got business acumen skills. And what I'm hearing is that you're talking about the the change maturity scale, like the change maturity path that people are going on as business owners. And I just want to pick up on the two things that you've talked about, which is, the language that's used and also the role models that may or may not be around people. And I think the question I have is, like, if I'm a regional self-employed owner, I don't know what I don't know. So in some respect, I actually think that the language barrier or the modelling barrier has to be linked from top down, and that might be through awareness raising, that might be through blog posts, that might be through even just forums like today, where you're actually helping like as you talked about the example, regional self-employed people not even seeing themselves as a business owner, because they're in there doing the doing. They don't actually feel like they're an owner of their business. They're a technician doing the doing.
That's right.
And one thing that I've only briefly looked at the statistics. I haven't even gotten into your report yet, but I'm excited to have a look at it. If 35% of Australian business owners are women, and they are usually sole operators or have less than 4 staff, they are running flat out.
Absolutely.
They don't even have time to reflect on a business plan, a strategy, or whatever. Like, it's maybe given lip service with the accountant once a year, if they're lucky. And I'm looking at, how can we, raise the awareness, because that's definitely something that's part of that change maturity roadmap. And also looking at how technology can actually be almost like an advocate for sole operators, so that they can get to scale, or if it's people who've been in the game 14, 15 years, that they can step out and put somebody else in to be able to either scale or to have a succession plan, etc. But anyway, I just think it's really fantastic that you've picked up on language and modelling. And so my question is, how do people who have already scaled and are already business owners give back to this community to keep bringing them up the change scale? Even if it's from level 0 to level 1, we're going to see incremental, maturity in that path.
Fantastic insights, and thank you. And I appreciate the kind feedback about the work we're doing and the research that's there. There's a couple of things that you touched on that I think are so important. And one of those is about that giving back and that learning from others. So when we look at all of what we're being told about what we should be as women and what we need to do in business and the particular challenges that are there, and then we overlay that with what we know about things like imposter syndrome, there can be this belief that we have to know everything about everything. And then that sits alongside that I only know what I know, right? I'm only the product of what I've been exposed to in business, right? Or what I've been exposed to in life. And we have to find a certain comfort level with recognizing what we do know and where we do add value and where the natural boundaries are of our knowledge, and being very comfortable and confident saying, I'm actually going to seek out help in that particular area. It can be unproductive and not a very good use of time for us to try to close all of those knowledge gaps ourselves. You could read business book after business book to try to be a better marketer. But if that's not where your skill set lies or where your previous experience lies, I would argue that that's not the best use of your time in business, right? Find somebody else to close that knowledge gap for you. How and when you do that and the ways that you engage that, there's a spectrum and there's a different way of doing it. Everything from who can I get to do some work for me for free or in some kind of contra arrangement, through to I'll actually pay and engage somebody to do that and formalize that relationship. So I think having that, and this is the difference between self-confidence and confidence in decision-making. When I have self-confidence, I can appreciate my knowledge, the boundaries of my knowledge and what I'm good at, and actually not feel any less valuable as a business owner by saying, I actually don't know anything about cap tables. So when I go into an investment environment, I am going to be completely out of my depth. It doesn't mean I don't have the intellectual capacity to understand it. I just don't know it yet. I've not been exposed to it. And so I need some help there, and I need to seek out that particular kind of help. So then when you reach out to people in that giving back aspect, it requires us as business owners to be really clear about the help we need and the questions we ask. So I call this having conversations with purpose, right? I don't want to talk about everything in my business. I want to talk about this particular issue. So I will find that business owner that's gone through what I'm about to go through, or that professional in business that's gone through that. And I will say, not can you help me with everything, but can you help me with this? How do I mobilize that support? How do I mobilize that? What's great then for encouraging those business owners that have gone through that scale journey to give back is it allows them to give back with structure. If I'm running my own successful $10 million business and I want to help other women in business to come through that journey, I naturally need to have boundaries to that help, right? Because I can't give and give and give. And this is where sometimes mentoring can kind of fall down because we don't put the appropriate boundaries around that. So I would encourage as a female, whether you're an executive or you're a business owner and you want to actually access that help, take a little bit of time to be really clear and say, what are the 3 questions I need to know right now? And who do I need to go and ask that? And then ask and ask again and ask again. And if they tell you and you say, I still don't get it, I would say it's not about your capacity to understand. It's about their capacity to explain. Ask them again and ask them again until you get it, right? And then you go, I've acquired that. Now I might need someone else. I might need to ask a different person. And there's a whole other section I'm happy to connect in later and talk about it, but also around how you mobilize advisors and advisory support around you in your business and going from an informal way to an formal way. And we did see that access to specialist advice and knowledge and networks is a key part of that scale journey. That is a turning point for a lot of businesses when they change the way that they seek out help and they change the way that they spend their time accessing that help. They become a lot more laser-like focused and a lot more clear on who do I need to go to get this specific type of help so I can then move on to the next part of my journey. Does that make sense, or does that help, Janelle?
Yeah, no, that does. I mean, it raises other questions for me, which is good. I mean, I definitely agree that people need to have an objective with their questions and be really clear on their conversations that they're asking. And I guess like any journey of self-awareness, if there's any shortcuts with that, that really helps. I mean, some of the things that I would have done in the corporate world would be things like a Myers-Briggs, or if it's in personal development, it would be, writing out my life story. And, I've recently come across an entrepreneur's profile and just sort of seen, what quadrant I fall into. And I'm sharing that with any business owners that I know and just sort of going, hey, just identify what kind of entrepreneur or business owner you are, then exactly with what you're saying. Like, don't try and be all things to all people. That's right. Focus on your strengths, back yourself, know exactly what it is your power, and, outsource or delegate or pull in the other scaffolding that you need, and then, get that alignment in place, and then you can be a powerhouse moving forward.
Yeah, excellent. We'll have some fantastic conversations following this, I hope.
Absolutely. I feel like, unfortunately, we're almost up to time, and I feel like we could probably go on for another hour talking about this. So I think we'll have to reconvene and keep the conversation going. But I guess I'd just like to say, Jan, thank you so much for such an insightful session and such an interesting discussion. I really appreciate everybody's participation in this. I think we've really just hit the tip of the iceberg. Some of the observations that really stood out for me were things like, it's never been a better time to be a woman in business. I think that's a really powerful statement. I think it's very, very true. We've got a lot of support around us now. People are recognising our capabilities and what we can do. And I think it is a really good time. We've got some great communities together. Another thing that stood out for me is investors don't like to think that they're paying the founder's salary. I thought that really kind of hit me today as well. And your advice about talking about getting revenue first yourself, putting in the sweat equity, and maybe work part-time in another business so that you can service your startup. Another point that came up was we don't know what we don't know. And there are resources, and one of the tools that I actually use with my clients to help them really focus on that is I say to them, look, I want you to create your own board of directors. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we don't want a board of directors yet. So just imagine if you have a boardroom table, who would you have seated at that boardroom table that is going to help you get to the next stage of your business? And they may come and go and change through the journey, but it's a really great tool to think about as to who you would really have sitting there and helping you. And then your point about having conversations with purpose, finding that person that's gone through the specific area that you need help with. And I think some of the things that our audience today can think about is, what is scale and why does it matter? What does it actually really mean to you? And the point you made that scale is a choice, not a judgment. So what are those 3 questions that you want to ask right now? And your point about keep asking them until you get to that particular point. And the other part was that 70% of people seek support from specialist advisors, and they can be from anywhere, ranging across mentors and coaches to other people. Somebody mentioned role models and so on, so that's definitely encouraged. So I just want to ask you to drop a Y in the chat box if you got value from Jan's session today. And while you're doing that, Braintree has created this program, the Reality Zone, which includes over 20 masterclasses, and they've all been brought to you free of charge, as I said before, courtesy of the Stock Exchange. So it's all come to life because of our passion to help other women. And Jan mentioned earlier about the imposter syndrome, and we do have a masterclass on that coming up. We've also got another session on 4 steps to achieving your goals. So these are all tools that you can tap into, and they're all available for you right now. In my ongoing pursuit to support professional women, I founded the Women in Digital International Group, which is that invitation-only group we spoke of earlier. And that's an area where we can share insights and networking opportunities. And I talked about just ask. So this is an area where you can just ask those questions. Who do you want at your board of directors table? What are the questions that you want to ask? And this was a bonus exclusive to this group when you registered. But if you haven't already connected, I will send the link out to you in a follow-up email, so you can just request to join. I'll also just drop a link now in the chat box if you wanted to jump straight on. But as I mentioned before, even qualifying as a female professional, whether we're leaders, whether we're colleagues, or whether we're parents, we all have a responsibility to nurture these future female leaders. And leaning towards helping high school students, we launched the International Oyster program to help these future leaders from year 11 and year 12 onwards get an insight into the day of the life of somebody in a particular profession. And this starts to help those young people understand, what does it look like to do that particular job? Is that something that I really want to get into? Because in a textbook, it looks perfect for me, but in real life, is it actually what I really want to do? So we have got a little introduction to that initiative, I suppose. I just dropped a link in the chat box there. You can have a quick look. And basically what we're doing is we take 15 minutes of your time, we do a quick interview, we record it, and we make that available to year 11, year 12 students. So it's really easy. It's a fabulous way to be able to give back to what our future looks like. And as a finalist for ARN Women in ICT, I've successfully built and sold consulting and technology businesses similar to Jan's history. And I currently run a company called Serendip ID, which focuses on digital identity and data protection. So a lot of the coaching work and mentoring work I do feeds into the way that I run those businesses and how I help my clients to achieve their success. So I simply have a passion to bring that expertise to the table and exercise those coaching skills for the benefit of others. And I'm usually involved in multiple mentoring programs or one-on-one workshops with clients. So why did we create the Reality Zone? I hear you asking yourself, don't you have enough to do? So I have this motto every day, and it says I have to live each day with purpose and outcome. There's been quite a few events in my life that have shaped me into who I am today. And one of them is to realise that life is very precious, it's very short, and it should be lived to the max. And if I can help women all over the world live a better life through sharing experiences and learnings, then why not? And that's why you're here, right? To get value from this session to improve your life and your business. So drop a Y in the chat box if you agree. And what we've done here today for you is all commitments from Jan and I to help you understand that we genuinely want to help you create your new reality. So all I ask of you is that you're willing to jump on board and experience a journey that you will look back on as life-changing for years to come. Drop a Y in the chat box if you think that sounds amazing, and add some energy, another word or an image or something. But just before we wrap up, just let me ask you, have you got value from today's session? Drop a Y in the chat box if you think you got value from today's session, Jan's session. I think we could have gone on for a lot longer. And do you think that you could get value from the masterclasses? So if so, I have another question for you. Maybe some of you are wondering, how the hell do we manage to pull this program together? Well, let me tell you, launching the Reality Zone is an immense commitment of mine, so much so that we've been working till the wee hours of the morning, making sure that we bring this together for you. And amongst moving house, I had 2 eye operations recently, but I have a commitment and I have a determination to focus on a goal, and that's why we brought this to you today. So I want to thank you for giving up your time. And I mentioned this Just Ask, that my New Year's resolution was Just Ask. So I encourage you to just ask, even if you wanted to pop something into the chat box to ask the fellow members of this group. If you have a question for them that they can help you with, do so, please. Also, the couple of links popping up now, Facebook and LinkedIn. If you wouldn't mind just typing a reason why you would recommend this Reality Zone to your friends, your colleagues, your bosses, aunts, sisters, anyone, share the knowledge that Jan has shared with us today. I would really, really encourage that, and Jan and I would completely appreciate that. And one last thing I can ask, if you can just drop a line in the chat box of what you'd like to ask for that group. If you draw anything on this group, what would that be? So just finally, once again, and on behalf of Jan and I, we thank you so much for joining this session, and I hope you'll go into your day with a newfound energy and knowledge that you can apply your business and your new reality to the learnings that you've taken today. So I wish you all a great day, and thank you once again. And Jan, thank you so much for such a fabulous session. We really appreciate it. If anybody wants to stay on, we're happy to answer some other questions. So I'm not going to force you to go. Jan, as long as you're available, I'm happy for that to carry on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cindy. As I said at the beginning, I'd encourage anyone to connect in with me on LinkedIn. Very happy to continue the conversation or contextualize the conversation to your particular environment, where you're at in your business journey, whether that's as a business owner or an entrepreneur within another organization. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect and continue the conversation.